miss an all-new episode, Dogfight to the Middle.
Under the sway of symbols, engulfed in ardent ritual, Nazism enshrined itself as more than mere political doctrine. The reign of the swastika was rooted in occultism, a belief in magical forces that could unlock the secrets of the universe.
The Nazi Party actually grew out of an occult, or several occult groups that began in the late 19th century in Germany. I think these ideas were very widespread in Germany at that time.
There was a very violent reaction at the beginning of our century against materialism, positivism, the present. And it took the form of a kind of spiritualism, of going back to nature, of searching for life forces which are true against the present which is false. And Hitler got into contact with that.
This was the world into which Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889. Not in Germany, but in neighboring Austria-Hungary, an empire of many races and languages. Hitler's family was German-speaking, and it was to Germany that Hitler developed a passionate attachment and allegiance. Germany was an advanced industrial nation. But Hitler was entranced by an idealized Germany of a faraway mythical past. The young Hitler dreamed of becoming an artist. In October of 1907, he moved to Vienna to attend the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts, but he failed the entrance exams. Surviving on a small inheritance and the sale of watercolors he painted, Hitler drifted until he discovered a bizarre series of pamphlets titled Ostara. The Ostara pamphlets promoted an occult worldview based on a grotesque racial struggle begun in a remote past.
One of the presuppositions of Ostara was that the Jew was an ape man, and the Aryan was a godlike being, and that the Jew had defiled the Aryan woman, who was usually blonde. The occult connection is that the Aryans had been a race of giants, and the Jew was subhuman and brought this giant down by merging with him.
Prejudice against Jews was common in Europe. But it was this occult form of anti-Semitism that Hitler would embrace and nurture for the rest of his life. In May of 1913, Hitler left Austria for his beloved Germany. When World War I broke out a year and a half later, Hitler eagerly enlisted. Now he could be a German hero. He would later claim that during this war, he discovered he was being personally protected by Providence. He told the story of a miraculous survival.
I was in a trench with several comrades. Suddenly, a voice seemed to be saying to me, "Get up and go over there." It was so clear and insistent that I obeyed automatically and walked 20 meters along the trench. Hardly had I done so when a flash and a deafening report came from the part of the trench I had just left. A stray shell had burst over the group in which I had been sitting, and every member of it was killed.
This was grabbed by the occultists as a good example that Hitler was being guided and led by disembodied voices and supernatural forces. But the story just leaves a little bit of doubt in my mind as to whether or not it happened at all.
Germany's defeat in 1918 unleashed social upheaval and revolution across the country. The army moved to suppress disorder. Hitler, still a soldier, was sent to observe a meeting of a small radical group soon to become the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The party's name was frequently shortened to what would become a searingly memorable word: Nazi.
He didn't set out with the intention of finding something to belong to. In fact, it was a bit strange that he joined the party at all. And I want to mention that he'd probably attribute the action of Providence to that too.
Hitler quickly rose to prominence in the party, and by 1921 had become its leader, its Führer. Acutely aware of the nearly magical power of symbols, Hitler focused on creating a mesmerizing party emblem.
His main aim was to get something, as he said, something which had as much impact, if not more impact, than the hammer and sickle.
The swastika is an ancient symbol of good fortune, adopted by German nationalist groups well before the Nazis. But it was Hitler who gave the swastika the characteristic design that would make it an emblem of undying evil.
I myself laid down a final form. A flag with a red background, a white disc, and a black swastika in the middle. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, 1925.
It's likely that the Nazis felt that the swastika, being a symbol of the sun, the swastika itself invested them with tremendous power.
Not all experts agree about Hitler's belief in the nature of that power.
My feeling is that what Hitler was looking for was psychological magic as opposed to occultic magic.
The Nazi Party was moving towards its first great crisis, from which Hitler and the swastika would emerge with lethally charged power. On November 9th, 1923, Hitler and his Nazi stormtroopers marched on the Munich town hall in an attempt to seize power. It was intended to be the start of a national revolution, but the police opened fire. The Nazis ran for cover. 16 party members were left behind, dead. The coup had been suppressed. Although Hitler was ultimately convicted of treason, the trial provided him with a national political platform. From there, he declared Germany had been betrayed by the Jews, and that he and the Nazi Party could restore German prestige. Hitler emerged a patriot, the leader of a holy cause. A powerful future also lay ahead for the swastika banner carried by the Nazis when they stormed the town hall. as the blood flag, it would, at rallies and parades to come, touch and consecrate the standard of each passing unit. Adolf Hitler, personally channeling the flow of power from the swastika made sacred by the blood of Nazi martyrs.
When we return, we'll meet the occultists in Hitler's entourage who assisted his rise to power.
Hitler's involvement in the occult may have been profoundly influenced by the occult beliefs of some of his closest associates. Rudolf Hess had been with Hitler at the attempted coup. Both were convicted of treason and imprisoned at Landsberg Fortress. It was here that Hitler began the book that would in effect become the Nazi Bible. Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Hitler dictated while Hess typed the Führer's words. But Hess may have made an even more significant contribution to Hitler's career.
The occult groups that began in the late 19th century all talked about the coming of a Messiah. And it very likely was Hess who suggested to him that he could now become the Messiah that everybody was waiting for.
Hitler was released from Landsberg at the end of 1924. Hess, who would become deputy Führer, was let out a few months later. By then, Hitler had begun creating a new paramilitary unit separate from the existing brown-shirted stormtroopers. The stormtroopers were loyal to the party, but this new group, distinguished by its black uniforms, swore personal allegiance to Hitler. It was the Schutzstaffel, the SS. The SS would later be as notorious for its occult orientation and practices as it was feared for the torture and murder it committed. Its leader, carefully chosen by Hitler, was Heinrich Himmler.
Himmler was very much into the occult, and I think he did try to persuade Hitler to get involved too. Now Himmler believed that Hitler was a reincarnation of various old warriors and kings.
Consumed by Aryan myth, Himmler sought SS officers whose pure Aryan descent dated back at least 175 years. Another of Himmler's occult beliefs was that children conceived in Nordic cemeteries inherited the spirits of the heroes buried there. He later published lists of suitable cemeteries for breeding. Himmler's training of the SS was steeped in secret ritual conducted at an ancient castle. The main hall held a royal round table decorated with swastikas. Beneath the hall was a crypt that Himmler envisioned would one day contain 12 pedestals to support urns filled with the ashes of SS heroes destined for worship.
A lot of occult entered into the induction ceremony. They were, after all, inducted into an elite order on the model of the Teutonic orders of the Middle Ages. That's very important for the occult, by the way, that past and present are telescoped, as it were. Himmler believed in secret sciences. On the one hand, you would say it's all very bizarre, but on the other hand, he was an organizational genius.
One of Hitler's own greatest strengths was about to emerge with renewed, overwhelming force. After his release from prison, Hitler, always a dynamic speaker, had been forbidden to address mass meetings. Allowed to resume public speaking in March of 1927, Hitler seemed endowed with even greater authority and charisma. This may have been due to the influence of a third occult associate, a mysterious figure named Erik Jan Hanusson, a professional stage magician who was also known as a seer and psychic. Hanusson helped Hitler perfect a series of exaggerated poses, especially effective in an era when huge audiences could not see a celebrated speaker at close range.
He had been a master of persuasive speech before he met Hanusson, but Hanusson taught him a great deal about showmanship.
Occultists believe Hanusson may have also imparted occult techniques of mind control and crowd domination. The brutal truth may be that crowds simply liked what Hitler was saying. Germans, still humiliated by defeat and impoverished by economic chaos, felt victimized and abused. Hitler's unvarying message was that Germany had been repeatedly betrayed. The enemy was always the same, always the Jews. Underlying this economic and political appeal was the occult doctrine that Jews were inferior, subhumans, the inherent foe of the Aryan race. Hitler supported his passionate message with a series of adroit political moves, playing rival factions against each other. Although the Nazis did not achieve an electoral majority, they became so powerful that, in January of 1933, Hitler was offered the chancellorship. He accepted. The triumph was acclaimed in a torchlight celebration of the kind the Nazis had perfected. These rallies, always exalting Hitler and the swastika, would become a staple of life in Germany. The thrill of those mass meetings was strong enough to lure even a young Jewish boy to witness their power.
I myself, when I was 15, I went out of the house illegally, my family wouldn't have approved of it, and went to a Hitler meeting. And I was carried with it. Because first of all, you are in a crowd which all do the same things. They raise their arm, they shout the slogans, and you're caught up by that, yes? And second of all, he had this kind of charisma. You can't explain it. I won't explain it. It's impossible to explain. But he had this kind of charisma.
When we return, Hitler's occult gospel becomes a new German religion.
Now that Hitler was chancellor, the Nazi Party could begin the extermination of democracy in Germany. The effort met with surprisingly little resistance. It was almost as though the nation was entranced by this exciting new direction. seduced by the prospect of vindication and renewed strength, and by the power of the swastika. Manfred Rommel, son of one of Hitler's most famous generals, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, retains a vivid impression of those heady days.
Before, in democracy, the newspapers always criticize politicians that they are not unable to do anything what's reasonable. And suddenly, after Hitler came to power, all newspapers, newsreels, radios, they said that's wonderful.
Hitler's honeymoon with the German people was supported by their shared passion for the operas of Richard Wagner. Wagner was more than a composer. He was a master of intoxicating drama who reinvigorated the sagas and legends of German chivalry to create a glorious cycle of heroic mythology. Hitler, on at least one occasion, said that he based his religion on the Wagnerian masterpiece, Parsifal. A sacred national hero, Sir Parsifal had devoted his life to the pursuit of the Holy Grail. He was the best and brightest of knights in German medieval literature.
That imagery of knighthood was something that Hitler involved himself in. We have photographs of him dressed as a knight and in armor.
A persistent but unsubstantiated legend holds that Hitler, as a young man, visited Vienna's Weltliche Schatzkammer Museum and saw an ancient lance he believed was once in Sir Parsifal's possession. The lance, known as the Spear of Destiny, was said to have pierced the side of Christ when he was hanging from the cross. Occult tradition maintained that whoever possessed the spear and understood its sacred mysteries held the destiny of the world in his hands. On March 14, 1938, at the climax of the German annexation of Austria, Hitler returned in triumph to Vienna, the city of his youth. Those who believe the Spear of Destiny story say Hitler went to the museum and ordered the spear to be sent to Germany.
This is not altogether improbable because it's likely that Hitler would have wanted any connection with messiahship.
You'd have to conclude that the story was largely a myth. I've done a lot of research on it, and I just don't see how anyone could take it seriously.
Far better established is the link Hitler carefully forged between occult Nazism and conventional Christianity.
He used Christian vocabulary a lot. Hitler talked about his satraps as my apostles. What you have therefore here is that he superficially, or as far as it goes, he worked with Christianity. Christ becomes a German figure, a Germanic figure who has no ties to the Old Testament. Precious few to the New Testament too, by the way.
He once said to my father, "Your God is for the weak ones and my God is for the strong ones."
Hitler was clearly ushering in a new religion. There would be a new man created and a new civilization.
Until the new man could be created, Nazi scientists sought out, by careful measuring and testing, the finest flower of German youth. These were the chosen paradigms who best represented the blonde, blue-eyed Aryan ideal. Though those so favored received special training to develop athletic fitness and a proper reverence for authority. All this was, of course, politically expedient.
Hitler knew that if he took kids from the time they were little and molded them and brainwashed them, they'd be his for the rest of their lives. And that is what seems to have happened. He exacted blind obedience from them.
But the Nazi cultivation of Hitler youth was also rooted in veneration of occult Aryan myth and symbols.
National Socialism presented itself by symbols, like the myth of the Sun people. One thing National Socialism annexed as a symbol is nude Greek youth, the idealized male human form. That was the concretization, if you like, of the children of light.
Hitler meant to do more than educate and shape Germany's youth. He wanted literally to produce a new master race, bred back to the Aryan ideal. This goal was a distortion of Darwin's theory of evolution.
A lot of what happened could be justified under the idea of the survival of the fittest. What was occult about Hitler's vision of the new society was that the new man would be superhuman.
No one was more obsessed with this mission than Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS. A man who unhesitatingly employed his deviant imagination in service to the occult.
There was this one story that was discovered by a professor of anthropology in a deposition for the Nuremberg trials, and it told about a practice of taking fine specimens of SS men and beheading them and using their heads to try to communicate with Eastern masters who were no longer human but divine, presumably.
Hitler's empire also sent Nazi archaeologists to search for concrete physical evidence which would support the occult view that Germans were descended from earlier Aryan supermen.
A branch of the SS was the Ancestral Research Unit, which went all over Europe looking for remains of Aryan ancestors who might still have purity about them. Another thing they did was go to Tibet to see if they could find out how the Aryans had conducted themselves, what they could learn about that.
The whole thing strikes me as a farce. The sight of these SS people in their uniforms with swastikas on their sleeves, standing in the middle of Tibet looking for the master race.
Hitler's dream of an Aryan master race ruling the world was about to unleash the Second World War.
When we return, we'll discover the truth about the effect of astrology on the early course of the war.
One persistent legend about Hitler and the occult can certainly be discarded. No evidence exists that Hitler ever consulted an astrologer. Indeed, he actively discouraged all prophets except himself. However, one astrologer, a shadowy figure named Karl Kraft, became pivotal in one of the most mysterious series of events in World War II. On November 2nd, 1939, Kraft predicted that Hitler's life would soon be threatened by an explosion. 6 days later, a powerful bomb, planted by a would-be assassin, shattered the platform Hitler had left only minutes before. Providence, Hitler claimed, had again protected him. Kraft's successful prediction enhanced his reputation and won him the devoted support of a powerful Nazi already deeply enmeshed in mysticism, Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess. The degree to which Kraft and other astrologers influenced Hess would become an issue of national urgency a year and a half later. In the spring of 1941, Nazi Germany ruled most of Western Europe and was at war with only one nation, Great Britain. For reasons that are still mysterious, Rudolf Hess had become persuaded that he alone could talk the British into a peace treaty. A qualified pilot, he embarked on a bizarre, perilous solo flight across the North Sea on May 10, 1941. On that day, 6 planets were in line with a full moon, an astrological event that Hess believed favored his mission to Great Britain. Historians agree almost unanimously that Hitler was unaware of Hess's plan. The Deputy Führer, wearing a variety of occult symbols, parachuted into Scotland. He was captured and became World War II's most famous prisoner of war. Hitler repudiated Hess, claiming his former deputy had been driven crazy by astrologers and fortune-tellers.
He certainly said that the man had gone mad. Now Hess, because of his connection with astrologers, they were rounded up and supposedly questioned to find out which one of them may have given the Hess the appropriate date.
But British intelligence, perhaps because of Hess's astrological obsession, was mistakenly convinced Hitler was also devoted to astrology. They were therefore pleased when a European refugee named Louis de Vol appeared and claimed he was in contact with Hitler's so-called favorite astrologer, the same Karl Kraft who had predicted Hitler's close call in 1939. When further investigation revealed de Vol was not in touch with Kraft, the British recouped their investment by finding him another, more useful task. De Vol created 50 bogus prophecies and attributed them to the famous 16th century astrologer Nostradamus.
De Vol worked on some Nostradamus predictions, and what he did in particular was he produced these booklets that looked like they'd been legitimately published within Germany and predicting bad things both for Germany and for Hitler.
The literature was later dropped over Germany where, unlike Hitler, many people devoutly believed in astrology. Undermining German morale with phony astrological predictions of defeat may have been an effort worth making. But ultimately, wars are won by massive deployment of force and by combat bravery. In the spring of 1945, the Nazi Empire was collapsing as the Allies and Russians closed in for the kill.
When we continue, the final desperate months when Hitler's occult conviction turned against those who had adored and sacrificed for him, the people of Germany.
the tide of war turned against Germany, Hitler, once the central figure of German life, was rarely seen in public.
What was he going to do? Show himself in the bombed cities? That wasn't going to encourage his popularity very much.
Hitler used to draw his power and strength from his audience, but of course he could no longer do that when things started going against Germany, and it appeared that his magnetism, if you could use that word, started to drain away from him.
In January of 1945, as his world crumbled around him, Hitler retreated underground to his Berlin bunker. Here he prepared a final plan: the destruction of Germany, the country he had cherished all his life. He ordered the demolition of all factories, power plants, bridges, railways, communication facilities, and all clothing and food supplies.
In his last months, he sometimes said, if the Germans are not able to win, they deserve to disappear.
It's clear that he did not want Germany to go through the humiliation of surrender and preferred to see them destroyed. If they could not be the new race of supermen that he had predicted they would be, then they deserved to die.
Part of the occult is that it usually ends in apocalypse. There is an end scene. Now Hitler was obsessed by that. Everything he did was final, because he was obsessed with this apocalyptic idea that in the end there would be either a great glorious apotheosis or everything would go down in flames. That's very much part of the occult. And so everything went down in flames.
On April 29th, Hitler gave a clear signal that his mission was nearing its end. He married his mistress, Eva Braun.
Hitler always regarded himself as a symbol. He was the symbol of Germany, and he acted as a symbol. A symbol can't very well be married.
The next day, Eva and Hitler retired to the bunker's private suite and committed suicide to the sound of Russian bombardment. The date of Hitler's death has a sinister occult significance.
It's believed by some people that he chose April 30th deliberately because it coincided with Walpurgis Night, which is believed to be the most important date in Satanism. So, according to one commentator, he was giving himself up to the powers of darkness.
With Hitler gone, it was as if a spell had been broken. 1 week later, Nazi Germany unconditionally surrendered. The reign of the swastika was over. Years later, when trying to explain why they had followed Hitler into barbarism and murder beyond comprehension, some would claim they were overwhelmed by his occult power.
Can't you see the strength of his personality? How he swept people off their feet? If Hitler were to walk into my cell and say, "Do this," even now I would do it. Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, Nuremberg, 1946.
There is no question occultism lies at the heart of the crime that distinguishes Nazism from all other tyrannies. The war within the war. The war against the Jews. It was an obsession, inspired by a purely occult view of supermen and subhumans. The systematic slaughter of the Jews was a principal aim of the Nazi regime. Perhaps its single most important objective, a goal that dominated Hitler even in his final political testament, dictated hours before his suicide.
Above all, I call upon the leaders of the nation and all followers to implacably oppose the universal poisoner of all races, the Jews. Adolf Hitler, April 30th, 1945.
It is the central theme of eugenics. Fewer children from the unfit, more from the fit. And in Hitler's Germany, the fittest of all were men and women with blonde hair, blue eyes, and without a trace of Jewish blood. Under the program known as Lebensborn, adults with these traits were encouraged to produce thousands of babies. Their offspring are now in their 50s and 60s, unwitting symbols of Adolf Hitler's plan for a master race. Join us for Hitler's Perfect Children.
Steinhering, Germany. On the surface, an idyllic Bavarian town, not far from Munich. But for many, it holds the key to an agonizing past.
I knew that I was born in Steinhering. That's my birthplace. But I didn't know what Steinhering was.
Unwilling to be identified, this woman asked to be called Irene. A chance visit to Steinhering Town Hall changed her life.
She showed me the book where it is written that I am born here, and there was the word Lebensborn. And then I got a shock, I think. I said, what? Lebensborn? Me?
Lebensborn. The German word translates to the wellspring or source of life. But for these women and others, it holds a much darker meaning. Lebensborn is the name given to a clandestine Nazi program whose mission is to stockpile the so-called racially pure children of the master race. It is the brainchild of Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, Hitler's elite bodyguards and police force.
The Lebensborn project was developed with the underlying ideological aim of making certain that all potential German blood was saved for the future of the race.
The ideal, of course, was that the children born in the Lebensborn program would then go on to become good, productive, healthy German citizens, to be, in many cases, members of the SS.
To the Nazis, good German citizens means only one thing: Aryans.
The image of the perfect Aryan or German or Teutonic person was, of course, tall and blonde and blue-eyed, perhaps modeled after the Scandinavian peoples.
It was clear to anybody who looked at Hitler at the time that he didn't meet the criteria of an Aryan. Obviously, he did not have blonde hair. He was not a particularly great physical specimen. He was short.
The Aryan race, according to mythology, was based on several different groupings, of which the most superior, as the myth went, was the Nordic version of the race. But there were other so-called racial groups. The Nordic, Mediterranean, Alpine, that intermarried over the years, and this was how the Germans explained how so many of them had dark hair and indeed dark eyes and may have been small of stature. The idea for the Nazis, the aim for the Nazis, was to breed out these inferior strains and eventually come up with a purely Nordic race.
To promote this Aryan ideal, the Nazis used the principles of a popular pseudo-science called eugenics that first took root in England and the United States.
Eugenics was not really a science, although it had scientific underpinnings. It was basically a notion, an attempt to somehow enhance human genetics. The basic scientific framework to allow that to be done practically didn't exist.
Proponents of eugenics believe that those with so-called good genes, the intelligent, the healthy, and the morally upright, should be encouraged to have large families. Those with supposedly bad genes, the feeble-minded, the handicapped, and the criminal, should be sterilized or otherwise prevented from passing on their character traits. The first to implement such a program are the Americans.
Eugenic sterilization was first done in the United States. The state of Indiana passed a law in 1907 that sanctioned the sterilization of mentally unfit, so-called mentally unfit people, decades before anything like this was attempted in Germany.
In fact, by 1936, 35 U.S. states had adopted similar laws. The Nazis put their own spin on the movement.
Eugenics went from being about the preservation of the human race to the preservation of the German race and the purification of the German race.
They, therefore, rejected as well the term eugenic because it was not a German word and called it Rassenhygiene, racial hygiene.
In order to ensure the racial purity of the German people, the Nazis begin to pass new laws as soon as they come to power.
The first eugenic racial legislation passed by the new regime in the summer of 1933 was the compulsory sterilization law, modeled to some degree on American precedents. However, implemented, enforced with a Teutonic thoroughness and the authority of an all-powerful state.
This act aims to curb the reproduction of those the regime considers lives unworthy of life, the mentally ill and the congenitally disabled. By the start of World War II, an estimated 320,000 people are sterilized, about 1 in every 200 Germans. In an attempt to further their racist ideals, the Nazis use a massive propaganda campaign. They start with the children at school.
A child who was blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned would be brought up in front of the class and have the length of the earlobe measured, cranial capacity measured, eye color measured. Another student not having the same characteristics, and in fact, in some cases, deliberately made to appear to be Jewish, would be brought up and placed beside the other student for the students then to tell the teacher what the differences were and why one was better than the other.
Germans are bombarded with propaganda in posters, magazines, and movies. Everywhere, the Aryan is depicted as physically and morally superior, and nowhere is that superiority more evident than in Heinrich Himmler's SS.
To get into the SS, one had to prove that one's Aryan lineage stretched back to 1800, and if one wanted to be an officer, then they had to go back to 1750 and prove that, for example, there was no Jewish blood in their family tree, that they had no cases of disability or other kinds of disease, congenital diseases in their recent family histories.
SS candidates are subject to rigorous physical examinations and are evaluated by Nazi racial experts.
And saw itself as an elite of pure Germanic men who become the Praetorian Guards, if you like, of the regime.
Himmler feels the future of the German people is resting in the hands of his SS. He does everything in his power to ensure that they pass on their healthy Aryan blood. Since before World War II, all SS men need permission to get married, which is granted only if the prospective bride passes both physical examinations and ancestral checks for racial purity.
Himmler considered the SS as the avant-garde of the master race, and therefore wanted to encourage them to have as many children as possible. I mean, these were, in Nazi racial terms, these were the fittest and the healthiest and the most racially pure Germans.
And he expected minimum 4 children per SS marriage. And those 4 children were expected to be racially valuable, healthy, vigorous. In order to guarantee that, he insisted that these women be vetted before he or a superior officer would grant permission to marry.
In truth, marital status is not crucial to Himmler. What matters most is that both parents are racially acceptable and capable of producing healthy children. But a problem arises: how to ensure that all these racially pure, illegitimate children have a proper upbringing? The answer is Lebensborn.
The foundation had a mission to provide aid to mothers who were expecting children, whether these children were legitimate or illegitimate, if the racial purity of their parents could be established.
When we continue, Nazi propaganda urges women to give a baby to the Führer.
Their duty then was to provide as many children as possible for the fatherland.
Obsessed with the idea of creating the master race, Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, establishes the Lebensborn Foundation in late 1935. It is a secret breeding experiment, an attempt to encourage his racially valuable SS men to reproduce with similarly pure Aryan women.
The more babies of good blood that were born to the German Reich, the more future soldiers the German Reich would have, and the more future bearers of yet more future soldiers the German Reich would have. And this was presented as a patriotic contribution to the future of the race.
One of the main targets of this pro-natal propaganda is the BDM, the Bundesdeutsche Mädel, the League of German Girls.
Women who'd come through the BDM and come through Nazi youth organizations were in several ways ideal candidates for the Lebensborn. On the one hand, they were of course pre-approved, Aryan, healthy, racially acceptable young women. On the other hand, they'd been indoctrinated for years.
They were supposed to be aware that they should select a racially valuable partner, and that their duty then was to provide as many children as possible for the fatherland.
Indeed, in the world of selective breeding, every racially pure baby counts.
Lebensborn was closely tied to the attempts to prevent German women from getting abortions. And again, this is really just about Aryan women. It didn't matter to the SS what Jewish women were doing with their babies, if they were aborting them or not. That was of no concern. But the fact that Aryan women were terminating pregnancies was a tremendous thorn in the side of Hitler and Himmler and the SS.
The Lebensborn homes are presented as an ideal place to have a child. As Heinrich Himmler says in a 1939 speech, there they could pass the weeks before the birth of their child in agreeable surroundings and quietly await the great event.
Without question, the pregnant mothers received many benefits from going into a Lebensborn home. They received pre- and postnatal care. They also received the benefit of privacy vis-a-vis society outside. Once they came in, they were not subject to the looks and stares of neighbors and friends and passerbys who knew that they were unwed and pregnant.
The Lebensborn facilities, there are 10 in Germany by the end of the war, are an open secret among the Nazi upper echelon. They are made available to the wives of SS men and to any other pregnant Aryan women who know about them. That is, if they meet the stringent entrance requirements.
In order to get into a maternity home, a pregnant woman had to do several things. One, submit to a physical examination, submit to the ancestral check, which all prospective brides would have to submit to in the SS, but also would have to name the father. And the father, if not an SS man, and therefore not previously vetted in terms of racial purity, find documentation, evidence of racial purity on the part of her partner, which was not always an easy thing to do.
More than half of the pregnant women who apply for admission are turned away. Of those who do get in, the majority are unwed single mothers. By the end of the war, the number of illegitimate births in the Lebensborn homes reportedly reaches as high as 90%. The program is kept secret from the public for precisely this reason.
Hitler actually discussed the secrecy of Lebensborn, and their idea was that someday, after the war was over, they would be able to tell Germany what was going on and explain to the people what had happened in the Lebensborn homes. But the reason for the secrecy was that illegitimacy still carried a great stigma.
Himmler uses his role as the chief of German police to protect those who participate in the program. Because the police are responsible for registering newborns, it is easy to falsify the birth certificates. The identities of the SS fathers, and sometimes even the mothers, are often left out of the document. Birthplaces are also covered up. Years later, when the grown Lebensborn children begin searching for their past, these incomplete records will prove to be their greatest obstacle. All children, legitimate or not, born within the confines of the Lebensborn are technically the property of the SS. There is even a solemn naming ceremony consecrating the children to the service of the SS and the Reich. While most of the married women take their children home with them, many single women choose to leave their children in the care of the Lebensborns.
Most children born in the homes were not kept by their birth parents, one or the other. Most of them ultimately were farmed out, either to foster homes. Some of those in foster homes would subsequently be adopted.
SS men and their wives were, of course, the ideal foster parents because they were both racially pure and physically fit and the most reliable to be good Nazis, to provide a sort of, if you can say this, a good Nazi upbringing, an upbringing for their children perfectly in accordance with the values that the Nazis stressed.
Himmler, despite his role as the head of the SS, still manages to find time to take a personal interest in the day-to-day life at the Lebensborn homes.
There's evidence that he frequently visited the Lebensborn homes, that he demanded frequent reports about the numbers of babies being born, about conditions within the homes.
Children born on his birthday, the 7th of October, received special gifts from the Reichsfuhrer. He became the guardian of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these children. The man loved children, and indeed produced 2 illegitimate children of his own, by way of, I guess, setting an example for his men.
For the children who live in the Lebensborn homes, their days are filled with outdoor activities and Nazi-sanctioned songs and games. They are encouraged to be aggressive, to be active, to be leaders. They are the apple of Himmler's eye.
This is one man who believed in the 1,000-year Reich and believed it would take about 1,000 years to replenish good German blood. And hence those babies, those young children in those SS maternity homes were to be the future.
When we return, Himmler and the SS look to the occupied countries to reclaim every drop of German blood.
The Norwegian woman was seen as a premium Aryan woman, good blood, blonde. Yeah, so it was a Ur-Aryan, you can call him.
By the early 1940s, the Lebensborn program is being fully implemented. It is clear, however, that not enough children are being produced to suit Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and driving force behind the Lebensborn. Within the walls of this countryside retreat and others like it in Germany, only an estimated 7,500 babies are born through the program.
Himmler tried his best to encourage SS men, even to require SS men to have multiple children. Himmler actually thought that all SS members should have to have 4 children, although the average turns out to be much closer to 1 child for every SS man.
Despite financial incentives to have children and fines for those who didn't, many members of the SS have misgivings about the program. Most of them choose not to produce babies for the state.
A program like Lebensborn involved sanctioning illegitimate births. And here we see 2 Nazi principles coming into contradiction. On the one hand, the principle of maximizing the number of healthy Aryan babies born, and on the other hand, protecting good old-fashioned values like the family.
The Nazis are well aware that the public would not agree with the Lebensborn program and decide to keep it a secret, but rumors begin to spread. Were the SS being put out to stud, to reproduce like prized racehorses?
The Lebensborn homes were clearly not stud farms. The women who went into Lebensborn homes were already pregnant, and they went there to have their babies in a clean and safe setting.
Having failed to produce enough children on the home front, Himmler turned to the German-occupied countries. By the spring of 1940, Germany has invaded Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and France. Himmler has already revealed his plans in a 1938 speech. He says, "I really intend to take German blood from wherever it is to be found in the world, to rob and steal it wherever I can." Though the Nazis attempt to establish Lebensborns in many of the occupied countries, there is great resistance.
France, for example, women who had become pregnant by German personnel discovered that going to these homes might well result in them leaving without their children. They resisted going to them as best they could and managed to indeed quite often elude Lebensborn authorities.
But in marked contrast to other occupied countries is Norway. The government of Prime Minister Vidkun Quisling collaborates with the Nazis, who set up 9 Lebensborn-type homes there, only 1 fewer than in Germany itself. This pleases Himmler greatly, as the women of Scandinavia in particular exhibit the cherished blonde hair and blue eyes of the ideal Nordic strain of Aryan.
When there were sexual liaisons between Germans and Norwegians, there wasn't much doubt, unless the Norwegian happened to be of Jewish ancestry, about the racial suitability of the child to be born.
Tor Brandaker is the product of just such a wartime romance. He is currently the leader of the Norwegian Lebensborn organization.
The Norwegian woman was seen as a premium Aryan woman. Good blood, blonde, yeah, so. It was a Ur-Aryan, you can call it.
Recognizing what is, in their eyes, a racially desirable gold mine, the Nazis proved to be very accommodating.
All the resources the German state have been opened in, so food, doctor, medical care, everything was tip-top. So it was a complete hospital system in the system, just for Lebensborn.
There is, of course, a catch.
They can go to Lebensborn and get birth to the kid anonymous. They've been taken care of, but they have to sign a paper. The kid's been turned over to the German state. You don't get your kid back after he was born. The kid's been sent to Germany, to the foster parents, nursing homes. But it was a way to do it, because of being a lonely girl in a war with pregnant with a foreign soldier. It was not so easy, you know.
The current estimate is that between 6,000 and 12,000 Nazi-bred children are born in Norway. The Lebensborn program is a greater success here than in Germany itself. In countries not as accommodating as Norway, the Lebensborn Foundation implements a very different strategy. In occupied Poland, for example, they decide that if racially valuable children cannot be bred, they will be stolen.
Polish children became a target of Lebensborn efforts to secure children of good racial ancestry, in part because Germans were all too aware that the Polish East, so to speak, had on occasion been German.
The Lebensborn take in the children the SS finds suitable for Eindeutschung.
The best English translation for Eindeutschung is Germanization, and that is essentially imbuing a person believed to have, quote, German blood, end quote, with, or familiarizing that person with German culture and the things that he or she ought to believe and feel as a person possessive of German blood.
Himmler is confident that the Germanization will be a success. In a 1940 memorandum, he writes, "We are convinced that our own philosophy and ideals will reverberate in the spirit of these children who resemble us racially." The SS are trained to recognize the features of children who have Aryan blood. They keep a constant eye out for these prospective Germans.
The SS, in terms of an occupation and a police function, could go into homes, could go into schools, could go into hospitals, and thereby ascertain that there were some children there who looked to be very German, very Aryan, and could identify them that way.
The SS kidnap an estimated 200,000 Polish children. They are tested for racial purity and given psychological exams at the SS's Race and Resettlement, or Russia, office in Lodz. Children between the age of 6 and 12 are sent to German boarding schools and indoctrination camps similar to the Hitler youth camps. Children under 6 are sent to Lebensborn homes.
These kids were forced to forget their Polish, if that was possible. They were forced to only speak German. They were forced to conform to German culture, to German education as rigorously as possible. And they weren't told about their own origins.
As they do for German children in the Lebensborns, the SS falsify crucial documents for the new arrivals.
A different name for the child, last name in particular, if not both names. In many instances, the birth certificate would not necessarily reflect an actual correct date of birth.
With the evidence of their former Polish lives effectively erased, the children are then adopted or placed in foster homes. In most cases, the German parents are no more aware of their new child's Polish origin than the child. In a 1943 speech, Himmler justifies the Germanization of the Polish children. "I think it is our duty to take these children, even if we have to rob or steal them. Either we recover this superior blood and use it ourselves, or we must destroy it." When we continue, the war comes to an end, and Himmler's dream of an Aryan future becomes a nightmare for the Lebensborn children.
When the peace was declared, then they started a war against us.
When mothers in the Lebensborn program gave birth to disabled children, the babies were often poisoned or simply allowed to starve.
By April of 1945, American, British, and Russian troops are closing in on Germany. The Wehrmacht, or German army, is forced out of the occupied territories. Outmanned and outgunned, Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich is collapsing.
As the Wehrmacht had to retreat out of the Soviet Union and then out of Eastern Europe and ultimately back into German territory, the Lebensborn homes were evacuated.
Germany's surrender on May 7, 1945, brings to a close any hope of a master race. SS leader Heinrich Himmler attempts to flee Germany, but is captured by British forces. On May 23, 1945, while in custody, he swallows a cyanide capsule and kills himself. In the final days of the war, most Lebensborn records were destroyed, and those that remain are locked in files throughout East and West Germany.
And many children themselves had no idea that they had been born into the Lebensborn program. Often they found out that they were adopted, but didn't know anything more about their own heritage or the circumstances of their own births.
After the war, the adoptive parents tended to keep the identities of Lebensborn children secret, even from the children themselves, for two important reasons. One involved the stigma of illegitimate birth, and reinforcing that particular stigma was a double stigma of association with the Nazi regime.
The children who had been kidnapped from Poland face especially difficult odds in uncovering their past. Because the SS has created false identities and papers for them, finding the true families of these children becomes a nearly impossible task. It is estimated that only 40,000 of the reported 200,000 kidnapped children are returned to Poland.
The Anglo-American authorities were reluctant to break up functioning families if the child had been adopted and was well adjusted in its German family, and this reluctance was further reinforced by the oncoming Cold War and the establishment of a communist regime.
For the thousands of children born in Lebensborn, it will be years before they begin to understand their part in the experiment to create a master race. Helga Karau was born in the Lebensborn home in Steinhering, Germany.
My mother was the most beautiful woman. She was tall and blue-eyed and blonde and very beautiful. She came to Munich in 1934 to work at Martin Bormann as a secretary.
Helga's father was an SS soldier with whom her mother had a brief relationship. After her birth, Helga's mother returns to work in Berlin, while Helga is left in care of a racially suitable foster family.
They were high-ranking Nazis with the staff of the representative of the Führer.
To Helga, the legacy of her Nazi past cannot be forgotten.
I was under the protection of the SS. The first 4 years of my life, I was a member of the SS.
For the children raised in Germany, the legacy of Lebensborn is one of shame and secrecy. But for those born in occupied countries such as Norway, being identified with Germany becomes literally a crime.
When the peace was declared, then they started a war against us and our mother. They put out 9 concentration camps. They arrested 14,000 girls. When the mother was arrested, nobody was there to take care of the kids, because the kids were standing alone, unprotected, hated by everybody, by the state, church, psychiatric, medical expertise, everybody hated them.
With nowhere else to go, many of the children are institutionalized.
What happened in this institution is grotesque. It's out of human mind. Every possible thing a human nature can do, ugly or bad things, pedophiles, sadists, torturists, has been done against innocent kids in Norway.
When we return, the legacy of Lebensborn. Could it have worked?
I think if you try and enrich for blonde hair and blue eyes, you can probably do that. But what do you have when you finish?
Soon after the war, the director of Norway's largest mental hospital declared that any woman who had mated with a German soldier had to be mentally defective. He also concluded that 80% of the children produced by these unions must be mentally retarded as well.
The adult children of the Norwegian Lebensborn program have always known who they were. These children were branded as traitors before they could walk. The very blood which Himmler so treasured has marked them for scorn and abuse ever since, causing irreparable damage.
Alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide. Every month we have somebody who's making suicide. every month, no, it's stopping. But in 94, 95, every week, I heard some friends jump out the window, drunk themselves to death, overdose. They've been run over by a car. They hang themselves, shoot themselves, so on and so on and so on.
A group of Norwegian Lebensborn children are suing their government, claiming that the state looked the other way while thousands of children were being abused.
One of the reasons we fight is so we can get a report, official document report, so we can turn over to the next generation Norwegian and say, never, ever, ever, ever do the same thing again. Learn of it.
Unlike the Norwegians, the German children of the Lebensborn were never treated any differently than their peers. Some grew up in foster homes, others were adopted, some were raised by their natural mothers. But in almost every case, the children had no idea that they were the product of an SS breeding experiment. Their mothers were unwilling to discuss it, and their birth fathers seemed to have vanished into thin air.
It was difficult for the Lebensborn children to find their parents, their fathers, after the war, in part because the fathers did not want to be found and did not want to be identified as SS men.
The International Tribunal at Nuremberg declared the SS as an organization to have been criminal, and its members could be prosecuted for membership in the SS. And those who had been members knew that they had to burn or bury or discard their old uniforms.
In addition, birth certificates are incomplete or inaccurate. Records for the Lebensborn have been destroyed or damaged. Grown children of the Lebensborn in Germany only find out about their origins by chance, if at all. Irene, as she is asked to be called, found out that she was a Lebensborn child on a chance visit to Steinhering. Her father was one of the few who did not try to hide his identity.
Last year, when I came to Steinhering first time, I have seen the first time in my life the document where he has acknowledged the fatherhood. And now by this document, I could go to the Berlin Document Center and to search for his file, and I found his file, about 100 pages. And so I know a little more about my father, but it is stopped in December 44, and from that time I have no idea what happened with him.
When she was 42, Irene learned the identity of her birth mother as well and found her living in Leipzig in the former East Germany. Although they speak regularly, too many of Irene's questions remain unanswered.
She had no idea about Lebensborn. I asked her. I met her 3 weeks ago, and I showed her the document. I said, see, you have signed this document. There's written Lebensborn. And she said, I don't know what it is. I can't believe it. I think it is in a way that she don't want to be touched by this word, Lebensborn.
Unlike Irene, there are still many Germans who have no idea that they may have been a part of the Lebensborn project. And though records were recently made openly available, many do not even know to go looking for them.
In order to discover their origins, Lebensborn children who didn't know they had been Lebensborn children had to have some indication that they weren't who they were. And some of that impetus came as a result of the fall of the wall. The opening of archives in East Germany across the board not only produced a cache here or there of Lebensborn materials, but it also forced a massive reevaluation of a lot of agencies, organizations, and individuals in East Germany.
Now Lebensborn has received some attention, and only now are children who are actually born through the Lebens program, only in recent years have they, in some cases, have they found out about their pasts? Have they found out about the program?
Despite their new understanding of their past, the knowledge of being a Lebensborn child is not always easy to bear.
The Lebensborn things nobody can understand. Nobody knows exactly what happened under the word Lebensborn.
It's difficult to live this with this idea. I don't know what happened to the Lebensborn children in Germany, but they had a bad life, I think so.
These children, who were bred to rule the world, may never escape their legacy. Many are illegitimate, and all are linked to the Nazi past. But the question remains, would these people have been the vanguard of the master race? Could Himmler's twisted experiment ever have worked?
It was just a very odd notion, the idea that blonde hairs and blue eyes is somehow the criteria for superior humans. Just makes no sense to virtually anyone who looks at it. I think if you try and enrich for blonde hair and blue eyes, you can probably do that. If you want to eliminate all individuals who are not blonde-haired and blue eyes, you'll certainly enrich the population. It's a very strong selective pressure. But what do you have when you finish?
Given enough time and willing generations of parents, an experiment like Lebensborn could have theoretically succeeded in producing a race of similar-looking children. But there is no evidence to indicate that any scientific advantage resides in having blonde hair and blue eyes, or that a creature known as the Aryan even exists.
The Aryan race is itself just a construct. There is no separation that defines a person genetically as Aryan. Basically, we are all so close to being identical. All humans are so close to being identical genetically that the differences between individuals are far greater than the differences between ethnic and racial groupings.
Misguided or not, the plan to create a master race had only one major precondition that was not met: Germany's victory in the war. How different the lives of the Lebensborn children would have been if, as Himmler dreamed, they had been allowed to take their place as the rulers of the world, a racially pure aristocracy. The fact remains, however, that the legacy of the Lebensborn is only one of shame, pain, and regret.
After the war, the children raised in Norway faced more than just harassment. They were beaten and often institutionalized. In their lawsuit against the government, they're asking for millions of dollars in damages. The Lebensborn children received at least a small measure of satisfaction on the last day of the 20th century when the country's prime minister issued a public apology for the way they were treated. Most Norwegian Lebensborn children consider the apology far too little and much too late.
In the summer of 1934, Hitler had been chancellor about a year and a half, but there was still quite a bit of opposition to Hitler within the borders of Germany. Not everyone was enthralled with his methods of governing. There were some people who were thinking, well, maybe this isn't the guy for the job. The Night of the Long Knives was probably the most significant single episode in Hitler's rise to power.
June 30th, 1934. German freedoms and the rule of civilized law die in blood at the hands of Adolf Hitler. In the deadly hours to be known as the Night of the Long Knives, he murders his way to Germany's dictatorship. A string of pitiless and audacious assassins work for a bloody 48 hours to purge all who might contest him for absolute power or reveal a homosexual past. It is at this terrible moment that Adolf Hitler goes from just one more politician reaching for power in a chaotic political machine to a brutal dictator with the untrammeled power to murder millions.
In this two-day span, he eliminated all meaningful opposition within the German borders. It was a precursor, you might say, of what was to follow on a much larger and frightening scale. It was a prelude to the Holocaust.
Germans safe in their beds on the night of June 30th, 1934, are not aware that a great disaster is beginning in the streets outside. SS and Gestapo men speed to well-mapped destinations with lists of the doomed in their hands. They pound on doors and take away bewildered people who will not again be seen alive. In a tense headquarters in Munich, Adolf Hitler and a band of expert murderers huddle, nervously taking off arrests as word comes back from a network of political policemen spread across Germany. From Berlin, Stettin, Breslau, Dresden, Glevitz, and other cities, the word comes back on the progress of the cruel purge. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the lists of the safely arrested are growing nicely, and Hitler authorizes the irrevocable step. He sends a prearranged code word, Kolibri, the German word for hummingbird, the order for a final massacre to begin. The tension grows unbearably for Hitler as he mans the telephones with his co-conspirators Rudolf Hess, Joseph Goebbels, and Martin Bormann. His long dream of consolidating absolute power pivots on the success of this night's plan in neutralizing anyone he perceives as a potential threat.
He was really on the knife's edge at all times. The army might have chosen to assassinate him, the communists might have chosen to assassinate him, people within his own party might have chosen to assassinate him, but he had some sort of a gambler's luck.
In another key headquarters in Berlin, the rest of Hitler's brutes are in action, with Hermann Goering, Heinrich Himmler, and Reinhard Heydrich in immediate command. Hitler can take pride in his brilliantly assembled death teams.
It took Hitler 13 years to work his way to the top. But along the way, he had help from a small group of men who all shared a common characteristic. They were absolutely pitiless. One of Hitler's early biographers, Conrad Hayden, he described this cabal as beasts of prey, and that would not be an inaccurate assessment. During the killing spree, Goering is sitting at his desk in his ministry, a clearinghouse for all the murders, with his aides in there. And they're drinking beer and eating sandwiches and laughing, and there are shouts of raucous laughter coming from the room while these reports are coming in of people being killed.
As success grows more evident with each death, Hitler and his icy cohorts can take well-earned satisfaction at how close they are to gaining the fatal and absolute power they crave. Hitler's quest for power begins 2 years earlier. As the new Chancellor of Germany in 1932, Hitler is still very far from the consolidation of control that will